Artemis II is in danger. 4 astronauts, 25,000 miles per hour, a heat shield that fractured in over 100 places the last time it was used. Not a simulation, not a test. The actual crew, the actual mission, the actual moment. In approximately 4 minutes, their capsule will enter the atmosphere, and every communication link between those 4 people and the rest of humanity will cease. No signal in, no command out, no abort option, no backup plan, no second attempt. Getting to the moon is a problem of propulsion. Getting home is a problem of survival. NASA knew the shield was damaged. They flew anyway. What happens in the next 4 minutes will determine whether that decision was the right one. The 4 people inside that capsule are not test subjects. They are the first human beings in more than 50 years to leave Earth's orbit. Reed Wiseman is the commander, a former naval aviator trained to make decisions when systems fail and time disappears. Victor Glover is the pilot, the first black astronaut to live aboard the International Space Station for a long-duration mission. Calm and precise under pressure. Christina Koch is a mission specialist who holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman in history. 328 consecutive days in orbit. Someone who understands what isolation does to the human mind. Jeremy Hansen is the 4th, a Canadian astronaut and fighter pilot, the first non-American ever assigned to a mission this far from Earth. 4 people from different paths, sitting inside a machine that is no longer in orbit. The mission itself is deceptively simple. 10 days, launch from Earth, travel nearly 400,000 kilometers through empty space, loop around the moon and come home. No landing, no surface operations, no second chances. A flight designed to prove one thing, that human beings can leave Earth and survive the return. The launch is violent. The Space Launch System ignites with more force than anything NASA has ever built. For 8 minutes, the crew is pinned to their seats as the rocket climbs through atmosphere, through turbulence, through max Q, where the stress on the vehicle reaches its peak. Then suddenly the engines cut, the boosters separate, and for the first time they are weightless. From that point forward, everything becomes quieter, more controlled, more precise. Orion separates cleanly and begins its journey outward. At first, Earth fills the window, bright and familiar. But with every passing hour, it gets smaller, until it becomes something the human brain struggles to process. Not a place, but an object. For days, they travel through deep space with no nearby spacecraft, no traffic, and no immediate help. Just 4 people inside a capsule, moving faster than any humans have traveled in half a century. The moon begins as a distant shape, then slowly grows, until it fills the window, a world of shadows and impact scars, close enough to study and distant enough to remind you that you are not meant to be there. They pass behind it, and communication cuts instantly. 40 minutes of complete silence, no voice from Earth, no signal back, no guidance from anyone outside the spacecraft. Just the crew and whatever happens inside that capsule. And then, just as suddenly, they emerge. The signal returns. The trajectory holds. Everything works. Most people think that was the hardest part. The distance, the isolation, the silence behind the moon. It wasn't, because all of that still allows for survival. The real test was always waiting at the end, not in deep space, not near the moon, but here, at Earth. Because getting there is a matter of engineering. Getting back is a matter of physics, and physics does not negotiate. It does not care who you are, how much training you have, or how important the mission is. On the return trajectory, Orion is no longer traveling outward. It is falling, pulled by Earth's gravity, accelerating faster and faster, until it reaches a speed no human body can survive without protection, 25,000 miles per hour. At that speed, the air in front of the capsule does not move out of the way. It compresses violently, turning into plasma, a shell of superheated gas wrapping around the spacecraft. Temperatures rise past 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to destroy everything inside the capsule if the shield fails. There is no slowing down, no turning away. No second attempt, only one path, straight through it. And at the front of that capsule, between those 4 astronauts and that wall of fire, is a layer of material just a few inches thick, the heat shield. And the last time it flew, it cracked in over 100 places. Of the entire mission, every system, every maneuver, every calculation, there is one phase where nothing else matters. 4 minutes, and it begins now. Artemis I was supposed to answer every question before a human ever stepped inside that capsule. It launched in November of 2002, uncrewed, carrying no lives, no risk beyond hardware. The mission profile was nearly identical to Artemis II. Travel to the moon, perform a distant retrograde orbit, and then return to Earth at full re-entry velocity. It was designed to test everything that matters, especially the one system that cannot fail: the heat shield. On paper, the system was proven. Orion uses a material called avcoat, a modern evolution of the same ablative technology used during Apollo. It doesn't resist heat in the traditional sense. It absorbs it, burns away in a controlled manner, and carries that heat away from the capsule as material is lost layer by layer. That process is called ablation, and when it works correctly, it looks predictable, uniform, controlled. But when Artemis I returned, something didn't match the models. As the capsule re-entered Earth's atmosphere, engineers expected to see a smooth pattern of erosion across the shield. Instead, they saw irregular behavior, chunks of material breaking away, not small particles, but larger fragments, pieces that separated in ways the simulations had not predicted. When Orion was recovered and the heat shield was inspected, the data confirmed it. More than 100 locations across the surface showed signs of unexpected fracturing. Not surface scratches, fractures, material that had cracked, separated, and in some cases detached entirely under re-entry conditions. That was not supposed to happen. To understand why it happened, you have to understand the maneuver Artemis I used during re-entry. It's called a skip re-entry. Instead of diving directly into the atmosphere, the capsule enters at a shallow angle, generates lift, and then briefly exits back into space before coming down again. Think of it like a stone skipping across water. The advantage is reduced g-forces and more control over the landing zone. It spreads the heat load across multiple phases instead of one continuous descent. On paper, it's safer for the crew, but it also changes the way heat and pressure interact with the shield. During that first dip into the atmosphere, the outer layers of avcoat begin to char and erode. Gases form inside the material as it heats up. Normally, those gases escape gradually as the material burns away. But in a skip re-entry, something different happens. When the capsule exits the atmosphere after that first pass, the external pressure drops suddenly, while the internal gases inside the heat LD are still expanding. That pressure imbalance creates stress inside the material itself, and in Artemis I, that stress found weak points. Internal pressure pushing outward, breaking sections of the shield in ways that were never fully captured in pre-flight models. NASA spent months analyzing the data. They ran simulations, recreated the conditions, and studied the ablation patterns in detail. The conclusion they reached was precise, but not entirely comfortable. The heat shield had behaved differently than expected, but not in a way that would necessarily lead to catastrophic failure. That distinction matters, because in engineering, not catastrophic does not mean safe. It means the margin still exists, but it may be smaller than you thought. The question was simple. Do you redesign the system, delay the mission, and eliminate the uncertainty? Or do you adjust the way you fly and accept the risk? NASA chose the second option. They removed the skip re-entry. Artemis II will not bounce off the atmosphere. It will come in directly, a steeper, more traditional descent profile, closer to what Apollo used. That change reduces the internal pressure cycling inside the heat shield, eliminating the exact conditions that caused the fractures on Artemis I. But it introduces a different trade-off: higher thermal load in a single continuous pass, more heat, more stress, less forgiveness. The material itself has not been replaced. The shield design remains fundamentally the same. The crew will be protected by the same system that fractured in over 100 places the last time it was exposed to re-entry conditions. And that is the decision everything now depends on. Because when Orion hits the atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, there will be no opportunity to test that decision again in real time. No adjustment, no correction, no second attempt. They saw the damage. They understood the cause. They changed the trajectory, but they kept the shield. They chose not to replace it. They chose to fly. 25,000 miles per hour is not speed in the way we usually understand it. It is not motion. It is consequence. At that velocity, the capsule is no longer moving through air in any normal sense. The air cannot get out of the way fast enough, so it compresses violently in front of the spacecraft. That compression alone is enough to raise temperatures to extreme levels, even before you consider friction. The result is not wind or turbulence, but transformation. The air itself becomes plasma. This plasma forms a shell around the caps, a layer of superheated gas glowing white hot, wrapping the vehicle completely. temperatures climb past 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. At that point, nothing outside the spacecraft behaves the way it does on Earth. Molecules break apart, electrons are stripped away, the air becomes electrically charged, unstable, and opaque. And that is where the next problem begins. Because this plasma does not just produce heat, it blocks communication. Radio signals rely on electromagnetic waves passing through the atmosphere, but plasma, at these temperatures and densities, absorbs and deflects those signals. It creates a barrier that no transmission can pass through. Not from the spacecraft to Earth, not from Earth to the spacecraft. It does not matter how powerful the antenna is or how advanced the system is. Physics simply does not allow the signal to escape. For several minutes, the crew disappears. No telemetry, no voice, no confirmation of status. Mission Control can do nothing but watch the clock and wait for a signal that may or may not return on time. Inside the capsule, however, everything is still happening in real time. The forces build rapidly. Deceleration pushes the astronauts back into their seats with increasing intensity. Every system is operating at its limit. The heat shield is absorbing energy at a rate that is difficult to comprehend, layer by layer, burning away exactly as it was designed to do. But design only matters if the structure holds. The change NASA made after Artemis I was to remove the skip reentry and commit to a direct descent. That means no second pass, no brief escape back into space, no pressure cycling inside the material. Instead, the capsule enters once and stays in the atmosphere all the way down. It simplifies one problem but intensifies another. All of the heat, all of the stress, all of the energy is delivered in one continuous event. There is no break in the load. The heat shield must handle everything in a single pass. And this is where the fractures matter. Because a crack in a material like avcoat is not just a surface defect. Under normal conditions, it may remain stable. But under plasma load, under extreme thermal gradients, under rapid expansion and ablation, that crack becomes a point of weakness. Heat can penetrate deeper. Gas can enter the structure, pressure can build in places it was never meant to exist. And if one fracture begins to propagate, if it spreads across the surface or into deeper layers, the behavior of the shield changes instantly. Ablation is no longer controlled. It becomes unpredictable. Material can separate faster than expected. Heat transfer increases. The protective boundary between the plasma and the capsule begins to thin in localized areas. And once that boundary is compromised, the margin disappears very quickly. There is no partial failure in this phase. Either the shield performs as a system, or it does not. Inside the capsule, the crew will not see flames. They will not see the plasma directly. What they will experience is force, vibration, and heat transferring through the structure. Rising temperatures, increasing G-forces, a sustained environment where everything is operating exactly at the edge of what the system can tolerate. And they will experience something else. Silence. No updates from Earth. No reassurance. No confirmation that anything is going according to plan. Just instruments, procedures, and the knowledge that the most critical phase of the mission is happening without any external support. The trajectory is fixed. The physics is already in motion. There is no command that can be sent to change what is happening now. For these 4 minutes, the outcome is already determined by the interaction between end velocity, atmosphere, and material. And at the center of that interaction is a heat shield that has already shown it does not behave perfectly under these conditions. The only question is whether not perfect is still enough. Because when the plasma clears and the signal returns, it will mean one of two things. The system held, or it didn't. This is not the first time NASA has had to sit in silence and wait for a signal that may or may not return. In April of 1970, Apollo 13 was already in trouble, long before re-entry. An oxygen tank explosion had crippled the spacecraft, forcing the crew to abandon the mission and fight for survival. By the time they began their return to Earth, everything depended on whether the calculations were correct. The trajectory had to be exact. The angle of entry had to be precise. Too steep, and the capsule would burn. Too shallow, and it would skip off the atmosphere and be lost in space. When they hit the atmosphere, the communications blackout began exactly as expected. That part was normal. It always happens. Mission Control had a predicted window, a precise moment when the signal should return. But it didn't. The clock kept running. Seconds turned into minutes. Engineers stared at their screens with no data, no voice, no indication of what was happening inside the capsule. Every person in that room knew the possibilities, They understood exactly how little margin existed. And as the blackout extended beyond its expected duration, the silence stopped being routine and became something else. Uncertainty. They waited longer than planned before the signal finally came back. The crew was alive, the capsule had held. But for those extra moments, no one in that room knew if they had just lost 3 astronauts. That was Apollo 13, a mission where everything had already gone wrong, and yet the system still held together long enough to bring the crew home. Now consider a different mission. February 1st, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia was returning to Earth after a 16-day mission. During launch, a piece of foam insulation had broken off the externa, L tank, and struck the leading edge of the left wing. At the time, it did not appear catastrophic. The mission continued, but that impact created a breach. During re-entry, superheated plasma entered the wing through that damaged area. It began to destroy the internal structure from the inside out. Sensors started failing. Data began dropping out, but the crew did not fully understand what was happening. They did not know the shield had been compromised. From Mission Control's perspective, the data became increasingly irregular. Temperatures rising in places they should not, pressure readings behaving abnormally. Then, one by one, systems went offline, and then the signal stopped completely. Not because of a normal blackout, because the vehicle had broken apart. The crew never had a chance. These 2 moments define the boundary of what re-entry represents. In one case, the system holds under extreme conditions, even after a mission that should have ended in disaster. In the other, a single point of failure allows plasma to enter where it should not, and the outcome becomes irreversible. That is the difference, not between success and failure, between survival and loss. NASA understands this better than anyone. Every mission since has been shaped by those lessons. Every heat shield, every inspection protocol, every risk assessment is built on decades of accumulated experience, including failure. For Artemis II, NASA published a risk estimate that is difficult to ignore. The probability of loss of crew is not 0. It is not even close to 0. Depending on how you calculate it, the estimates fall somewhere between 1 in 2 and 1 in 50. Even at the most optimistic end, that is a number that would be unacceptable in almost any other field. But spaceflight has never operated under normal conditions, and the crew knows this. They were briefed on the risks, they understood, and the heat shield data. They know exactly what happened during Artemis I, and they know what changes were made and what changes were not. They are not guessing, they are choosing. That choice is easy to romanticize from the outside. It is easy to talk about courage, exploration, pushing boundaries. But inside Mission Control, during re-entry, none of that matters. Because when the capsule enters the atmosphere and the plasma forms, there is nothing anyone on Earth can do. The engineers are still there, the screens are still on, the headsets are still active. But the connection is gone. No commands can be sent, no corrections can be made, no help can reach the crew. Mission Control becomes something it rarely is, a place of observation only. They watch the timeline. They monitor what little predictive data they have. They wait for the exact second when the signal should return. And until it does, they are blind. 4 astronauts inside a capsule, surrounded by plasma, an agency that has seen both outcomes before, and a silence that will last just long enough to remind everyone exactly what is at stake. The capsule separates. At that moment, Orion is no longer attached to anything. No propulsion, no backup system to push it away from danger. Just mass, velocity, and gravity pulling it down. The service module drifts away, and what remains is a small cone-shaped capsule carrying 4 people directly into the atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour. The angle is precise. It has to be. Too steep and the heat load becomes unsurvivable. Too shallow, and the capsule skips off the atmosphere and never comes back. There is a narrow corridor, just a few degrees wide, and they are already committed to it. The first contact with the upper atmosphere is almost invisible. A thin trace of heating begins to form, then it builds rapidly. The air compresses. The temperature rises, and within seconds, the capsule is engulfed. Plasma wraps around Orion completely, a white-hot shell moving with it, isolating it from everything outside. The radio signal begins to distort, fragments of transmission cutting in and out, and then, without warning, it disappears. Mid-sentence. Mission Control hears nothing. The telemetry drops to 0. The screens freeze on the last valid data point. The voice loop goes silent. The only thing still moving is the clock. Inside the capsule, the experience is very different. The forces build quickly. The crew is pushed into their seats as deceleration increases. Vibrations run through the structure. The heat shield is doing its job, ablating layer by layer, burning away to carry heat from the surface. But the question is not whether it is working. The question is whether it is working everywhere. Because if even one of those fractures begins to spread under load, if heat finds a path deeper into the structure, the behavior changes instantly. There is no gradual failure, no warning that gives time to react. The system either holds together as a whole, or it begins to come apart. And inside the capsule, there is no way to see that happening. There is no window into the heat shield, no sensor that can fully explain what is happening in real time. Only indirect data, temperatures, pressures, vibrations, all of it being interpreted while the most violent phase of the mission is unfolding. Back on Earth, the situation is simpler and more brutal. They wait. No one speaks unless necessary. No one guesses. The timeline is known. The blackout duration is predicted. Every second that passes is measured against expectation. If the signal returns on time, the system worked. If it doesn't, they already know what that means. Seconds pass, then minutes. The capsule continues its descent. Still surrounded by plasma, still cut off FR, own the rest of humanity. The heat load begins to decrease as velocity drops, but the structure has already taken everything the atmosphere could give it. Then, at a specific point in that descent, something has to happen. The drogue parachutes deploy, or they don't. If they deploy correctly, they stabilize the capsule, slow it further, prepare it for the main chutes. If they fail, the sequence breaks and recovery becomes uncertain very quickly. There is no backup crew, no second capsule, no retry. Just one sequence of events unfolding exactly once. And then, finally, the moment everything has been building toward. The plasma begins to thin. The ionized layer weakens, and somewhere, buried in static, a signal tries to come through. Mission Control listens, waiting for a voice. Waiting for data. Waiting for confirmation that the heat shield held under conditions it had already struggled to survive once before. Because this entire mission, every decision, every calculation, every risk that was accepted, comes down to a single outcome. Did the shield hold? Because if it did, then humanity takes another step beyond Earth, toward the moon, toward Mars, toward everything that comes next. And if it didn't, then those 4 minutes become something else entirely. Not a test, not a milestone, but a line that defines exactly how unforgiving space still is, and how much it demands every single time we try to come home.